go. So we'll go ahead and just jump right in then. Good afternoon. My name is Sean Ulmer, Executive Director here at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art, and I want to thank you for joining me for another episode of Grant Wood in Focus, our quarterly Zoom series that looks at some aspect of Grant Wood's life or career. When I was thinking about what I might want to talk about this time, I reflected on one of our current summer exhibitions that our curator, Julia Jessen, just opened, a remarkable, extraordinary actually, exhibition called Visions of America, The Nation at 250. And it looks at the way that artists interpret America, sometimes celebratory, sometimes quite critical. The full range is on view. And so I said, well, Grant Wood did a lot of images that reflected America. And I vaguely remembered doing a presentation for the Iowa Ashley chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution on Daughters of Revolution, one of Grant Wood's paintings. I said, well, let me see if there's enough there. I could make it into a Grant Wood in Focus. So I looked through all of my PowerPoints, and I'm like, where in the heck is this thing? Can't find it. So I went to our YouTube channel to see, if it was somehow there, and oh my goodness, it was already there. I did this presentation 3 years ago called Grant Wood, George Washington, and the American Revolution. And I said, oh, I must have liked it so much, I already did it. So a little embarrassed. So I was like, okay, let me watch this and see if there's anything in here that I didn't quite feel finished with. But alas, no, it was a pretty good presentation. I'm kind of happy with it. And I hope that the 100 people who've seen it already feel the same way. And it did look at, Midnight Ride of Paul Revere and Parson Weems' Fable and Daughters of Revolution and the Veterans Memorial Window and several of works of Grant Wood that deal with American history. And so I said, okay, well, I've done that. So what can we do? So I started thinking, I said, well, we extrapolate a lot as art historians. We extrapolate a lot from extant work, and we try to draw conclusions about the artist and their thoughts based solely on their work. And that's very legitimate, no problem with that. But Grant Wood lived in a time where he could actually have been quoted, and those quotes can appear in various documents. And so I said, why don't I just look at newspaper archives and see if I could get a sense of what Grant Wood thought about America. And how did he express that? Because once Grant Wood had that incredible American Gothic moment, he was very much on doing presentations and lecture series and traveling around the country. And he was, unlike the other regionalists, he was very, very comfortable with public speaking. And so there's a lot out there, Unfortunately, no one has compiled this. And this is, I've discovered, an area that needs a lot of work. Grant Wood in his own words. So if any of you out there are bored to tears and want to do something that would really contribute to Grant Wood scholarship, start a project where you compile all of these incredible quotes that Grant Wood has been recorded as saying, and get, kind of a nice compendium of Grant Wood by Grant Wood. I think that's really, really interesting because as I did some of this research in looking primarily in newspaper archives, I found quite a few very interesting quotes, and then decided, okay, where does that show up in his work? So that's going to be our presentation today, looking at some of Grant Wood's quotes and seeing how they are manifest in his work. And not surprisingly, he wasn't necessarily talking about America. He was oftentimes talking about American art, because that's where he was. That was what he was interested in. So we'll see a little bit about America, but we'll also see a lot of comments about American art, and they're fascinating, I think, in that regard. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and here we go. Okay, and slideshow in the beginning. Okay, so I broadly call this Grant Wood and America, but it really is more Grant Wood and American art. But it's going to be, I think, a fascinating look at some of Grant Wood's thoughts. And I began with a few of those kind of classic paintings that Grant Wood created that dealt with American history. And I do encourage you, if you're interested in finding out more about that particular aspect of Grant Wood's career, to get onto our YouTube channel and look it up. It's Grant Wood, George Washington, and the American Revolution. It is interesting that both Grant Wood and George Washington shared the same initials. I think there was a certain kinship there, and many of the pieces deal, with the American Revolution. So here he is with Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. It's a wonderful documentary photograph. Of course, he's got the piece all framed up, but it's not done. Paul Revere's not in there yet. The horse is not on the road yet, so an interesting detail. Grant Wood, of course, was very much tied to American history, he himself having served in World War I, and then coming back as a veteran, began to teach in the Cedar Rapids Community School District. So he saw experience in his lifetime, World War I. And so it's not surprising that as a veteran, he submitted a proposal and it was accepted for the memorial window at the Veterans Memorial Building, which was a project that took quite some time. Here you see the finished project. It was an absolutely pivotal project for him. I mean, obviously, the American Gothic moment comes the next year in 1930, but this was a very, very important work in seeing him change his style. And exposing him to different things. So he had never made a stained glass window before. When it was completed, it was the largest stained glass window in the country. So that's hugely ambitious, and Grant Wood certainly was himself. But here you see kind of the figure of peace and victory with different soldiers along the bottom that represent the different wars that America had participated in. This window was manufactured in Germany by the Emil Frey Art Glass Company, and he had to go to Germany to oversee the manufacture of it because he knew what the different colors of the soldiers' uniforms were, whereas the German craftsmen would have no idea. And so he had to be there to supervise the coloration of the different panes of glass. And of course here, Midnight Ride of Paul Revere that I referenced a little bit earlier, somewhat dramatic, almost theatrical kind of representation. I'm just showing these, we're not going to discuss these in great detail, I'm just showing you, can give you a sense of some of the things that you will see in the Grant Wood, George Washington American Revolution PowerPoint. So Daughters of Revolution with this wonderful print behind these ladies by Loitza of Washington crossing the Delaware. And of course Parson Weems' Fable that you see here with the diminutive George Washington with his very advanced head on the body. Again, all for readability. And then here, and these are sort of really in chronological order, a painting that he did of Oliver Wiswell, which was to be the cover of a book, this book here. So he did things for specific purposes, in this case for a book cover. But then there are other things that sort of show him being very, very tied in. This is a somewhat unusual piece for him. This is really at the advent of the Second World War, where he created an image to be used to help raise funds for Britain. So Bundles for Britain. He created this very somewhat dramatic image of a woman sheltering a child with these bombers overhead. Initially in the war, it was all happening, abroad. It was far, far away. It wasn't, resonating, but Grant Wood certainly was aware of what was going on, even though he might have put on airs that he was just sort of a local, rural kind of guy. He was actually quite plugged in, as they say, and so he created this image, and these are fairly scarce to find out there. So if you find one, snap it up for sure. And so wanted to begin, sort of more or less chronologically, with this particular quote. Let me get this here. Let me see if I can. There we go. Okay, trying to get. There we go. All right. I don't like reading to people, but I think sometimes it does help. So for the first time in history, there are definite signs that we are tending towards an American style of painting. This is 1935. He's already had his American Gothic moment. He's will move to Iowa City during this year, so he's kind of finishing up his time in Cedar Rapids. It is impossible to get all of America on one canvas, but regional painters can give a composite picture. A regional painter is one who has lived long enough in a neighborhood to have it get into his blood. He may not like it, but he must have a strong feeling either for or against it, which was really kind of, I thought, a very powerful statement on his part. I mean, not surprisingly that he would say that the artist had to have lived in a place long enough for it to get into his blood. That certainly is very much in keeping with everything that we know about Grant Wood, and so he really wanted artwork to be authentic, that it came from really the inside of an artist, and he really believed in regionalism in a different way than we talk about it today. Regionalism here is sort of regions of the country, right? So it's not like, okay, it's not just Thomas Hart Benton and John Stuart Curry and Grant Wood. It's like there was, and we know this, there's a Great Lakes regionalism, there's a California regionalism, there's a Southwest regionalism. It's extolling an authenticity in the production of work. Now, yes, there was certainly a number of art critics who were not on board with this, who were much more, interested in following, say, European trends, or creating a different kind of style. But at the same time, equally important was this other faction of American art, where they were really sort of saying we need to celebrate all of the different parts of the country and what that brings to our understanding of American art. And then here, Hope of Art in Regional Competition. That is an article from May of '35 in the Mason City Globe Gazette. And I have it, it's a little bit longer, so I didn't type it out, but I will read it to you. And this is quoting Grant Wood at a presentation he did in Iowa City on May 31st. Quote, "The hope of a Native American art lies in the development of regional art centers and competition between them. Grant Wood, internationally known artist of Cedar Rapids, believes. In his essay, Revolt Against the City, published by the University of Iowa, Wood contends there is, or at least there need be, no geography of the art mind or of artistic talent or appreciation. Each section of the country has a personality of its own in physiography, industry, and psychology. Thinking painters who have passed their formative years in these regions will, by caretaking analysis, work out and interpret in their productions these varying personalities. When different regions develop characteristics of their own, they will come into competition. Out of this competition, a rich American culture will grow." Wood asserts that, quote, until 15 years ago, it was virtually impossible for a painting to be recognized as an artist in America without having behind him the prestige of training either in Paris or Munich. While today the American artist looks upon a trip to Europe much as any tourist would look upon it. This is a victory for American art of incalculable value. The long domination of our own art by Europe, and especially by the French, was a deliberately cultivated commercial activity, a business, and dealers connected with the larger New York galleries played into the hands of the French promoters because they themselves found such connections profitable. But, he says, the colonial spirit is, of course, an initiative spirit, and we can have no hope of developing a culture of our own until that subserviency is put in its proper historical place. The germ of such a system, he says, is to be found in the artwork conducted under the PWA. This was set up by geographic divisions and produced remarkable results, which is interesting because, of course, he was very intimately connected with the PWA in Iowa. So he had a lot of little nuggets in there, and he explored those. I mean, he's really kind of defining what regionalism with a small r is for America, and the things that really resonate with him. Again, very much about authenticity, but also about sort of this regionalism and the competitiveness that out of which comes really good art. And here, a paraphrase, not an actual quote, Grant Wood, noted Iowa artist, said in a lecture here Thursday night, he feels America contains as many beauties worth a painter's brush as do countries of the old world, and Americans are fully as capable of appreciating and encouraging art as Europeans. And Grant Wood would certainly know that because he, his clients absolutely supported him. They gave him opportunities. They purchased his work. And so the people who, he knew who were buying his work were totally appreciating it as American art because it was so very different. Certainly his mature style, so very different from French precedents. And these are all quotes that are happening after he's moved away from French Impressionism and into this new style, which we call his mature style, which is much more kind of akin to what one finds in say, Northern Renaissance painting, but of American subject matter. And we see some of that in these examples. So these are not necessarily images that deal with the American Revolution, but these are images of America, and here, Grant Wood is depicting the old Staymates house on Linden Drive, still exists today, you can drive by it, still very much looks like this, but it did not exist back in the day when people were riding on horseback and people were wearing antebellum costumes. So he's historicized it, but he's celebrating it as sort of an icon of domestic bliss, of domestic peace. The father's coming home, tipping his hat. The family's all out there to greet him in front of this really grand home, and it is really something that exists in his region. He's obviously taken some liberties with it stylistically and historically, but it is very much in keeping with his overall idea of what artists in America should be focusing on. And not surprisingly, I think something like Young Corn falls into this as well. I mean, this is something that would basically in his backyard, and it's in this case extolling the virtues of hard work. This is an image of painted in the depths of the Depression. The economy is tanked and will have remained tanked for many more years. And he's really extolling the virtues of hard work. Obviously, machinery did exist by this point in time, but he's kind of looking back at a time when people farmed by hand, and he is this farmer with his daughter and son in nearby, is working the fields by hand and doing hard work, and he's going to be successful. And it's an optimistic and encouraging kind of image in the depths of the Depression. But it is absolutely kind of a quintessential rolling hills of Iowa presentation. We're springing the country from a bit later, right before he passed away. Still kind of the wonderful rolling hills of Iowa. The style is slightly different than in Young Corn, but again, working the land by hand. Certainly there are tractors at this point, but they're showing a man with a 2-horse plow cutting through the land there. It's certainly a bit idealized in that, you know, there's no dirt. It doesn't look particularly laborious, although we know it is. But he's created this wonderful sort of vignette, almost magical in a way, and certainly drawn from memories as well. And, you know, and it's at a time when America is, you know, entering the war, and things are very unsettled. We didn't think we'd have another war after World War I. And here we were entering another one. And so people were looking for things that gave them hope, gave them encouragement. From 1938 in the Oakland Tribune, Oakland, California, I think an artist in America could do well to settle in some small city or town, learn to know his neighbors, let them know him, and then paint them at their daily tasks. And so that is a different recommendation that Grant Wood is making. It's very much akin to letting it get into your blood as an artist, very much akin to that. But he's really saying, you know, small city, know your neighbors, interact with them, and show them working. And so, you know, he does do that throughout his career. This from earlier, from 25, part of the J.G. Cherry series, whole series of laborers working in the J.G. Cherry dairy factory. And so he might not have known this person personally super well, or he might have in the course of painting this work, but he's showing them at work. Or here, Approaching Storm, one of the lithographs he created for the Associated American Artists series. Here, again, working the fields, a whole series of people for Approaching Storm. Again, sort of, you know, in both cases, fairly rural, small town. Sultry Night, again, sort of get to know your neighbors and you know, and have them, let them get to know you, and then you know, represent them. Every artist and the artist in every person should discover the beauty of things he knows and has lived with. It's just beautiful. Every artist and the artist in every person. He really believes that there's an artist in every person. And that's terrific. Should discover the beauty of things he knows. Again, that sense of authenticity is core to everything that he does and has lived with. And so there's this recurring theme, but he says it differently each time. And so it's really quite amazing when you find these little nuggets of quotes. That's why I think that there's much work to be done to find even more nuggets, to get a better sense, because I think at the end of this talk you get a sense of composite sense of some of the thoughts that guided him throughout his career. Now, he wasn't heavily quoted prior to becoming famous, so most of the quotes will happen after 1930, when he became much more quotable. And so, but we can see a lot of the antecedents of these quotes in his earlier works. So things that he knows, and so feeding the chicken, something that he knew all too well from his own childhood on a farm here. a more impressionistic work from earlier in his career, or the horse traders. You would have seen these wagons come to town, again from earlier in his career, a bit impressionistic. Or 3178, which was the home he built for himself with Paul Hansen, who built an identical home. They worked on it together. So this is something he would have known super well because they built this house together. Or Old Sexton's Place, it's a nearby location that he would have known all too well. Again, feeling that all of these local, rural scenes are well worth painting, recording, and they are authentic. Or here, the old stone barn, which used to exist right on First Avenue here in Cedar Rapids. Something that he saw and painted from life. Of course, this is a portrait of his mom, something that he would have known very well as well. And so here he's again painting what he knows and what he's really connected to. Or Arbor Day, he himself knew what a one-room schoolhouse was. Attended one, taught in one briefly, and so even though this is sort of from his past and a bit nostalgic, it is still something that he would have known well. And from 41, Grant Wood sees America in a significant role in defense. So this is another one of the longer quotes, so I didn't type it up for you, but I stumbled across this because in 41, we're entering the war. And so Grant Wood talked about that, and so I think he had something very interesting to say, and it's a longer quote, so I wanted to share that with you. So here in America, we have everything we need to meet any threat: men, machines, resources, inventive genius. Our chief weakness, as the president has pointed out, is that we're going about our defense effort half-heartedly. And our half-heartedness goes back to the fact that we aren't really awake to what we stand to lose. Here, it seems to me, is where the artists come in. This isn't any time for smart, sophisticated stuff in any of the arts, he said. On the other hand, I think the other extreme of flag waving is just as bad. I don't mean that artists should paint screaming eagles and goddesses of liberty upholding flaming torches. I mean that they should go on painting, as artists have always done, the simple, everyday things that make life significant to the average person. The simple, everyday things that make life significant to the average person. That's he sees as the solution for sort of encouraging the American response to the war. He goes on to say, once the people in this country are jarred awake to the real worth of what they possess, and he thinks that can be underscored by the paintings artists in America will make, what they possess in their way of life, no force on earth can beat them or push them where they don't want to go. It is time for painters, including myself, to put aside attempts at cleverness and sophistication in favor of simple, straightforward approach. It is time for us to admit that we believe in the values and goals we mean in general when we say the American way of life. We have been going through a period when we were so tangled up with doctrines, we were ashamed to be caught believing in anything. As a consequence, we are weakened now with cynicism and defeatism. The artist, as an artist, hasn't any place in his makeup for despair, he declared emphatically. Whatever his attitude may seem to be in other situations, when he stands before an easel and puts everything he has into an effort to make a sincere painting. He is a believer and a builder in the spiritual sense. As such, he has, in the time of great national crisis like this, an important part to play. So here Grant Wood has really kind of gotten into voicing specifically about the advent of World War II and the kind of role that artists can play in extolling the virtues of the American way of life, which should wake up people to understanding what they have to lose. That he believes we have all the resources we need, the men, the machines, the resources, the inventive genius, but we need to be woken up. We need to be kind of shocked into reality, and that's where he feels the artist can come in and play a significant role. So very interesting. It's, of course, this is very, very near the end of his life. So he's passes away in less than a year. So he doesn't, see this necessarily come to fruition. But he certainly was talking about it at this point and seeing a way that the artist can play an important role in national defense. And then a little bit later, from 41, when he was talking about, he's finishing up his last two paintings, Spring in the Country and Spring in Town. And someone asked him about them. Where did they come from? And he said, they have come from within me, which, goes all the way back really in some ways to the very first quote that I shared with you. He really believes in authenticity. He really believes that they should come from within. That's genuine. Those are the virtues he's trying to extol, the wonderful things that he, feels people are in danger of losing if they don't jump into the war effort. So here, Spring in Town, small town, small village, not unlike Czech Village was at the time. He says, and here, woman hanging a quilt, man working a small plot of, sort of more of a domestic garden, boy in the background doing mowing. There are various figures throughout the representation, but this is the kind of image that he is creating that he feels will help the war effort, that he feels will show people what they have to lose if they don't react, if they don't get on board. Or here, the work that we own here at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art, Spring and Country. And again, these are kind of companion pieces, and the last two pieces that he created before he passed away in February of 1942. And here you can see him, working on both of those, both of which are framed, but he's obviously mixing some paint there. So again, I haven't analyzed them, but they look pretty done to me. But this is really the last two works he creates, and this would have been probably even later than the quote from 41, because they're fully finished. And again, he becomes ill and passes away fairly quickly. Grant Wood, again, interesting, quotable person. I mean, love to read what other people say about Grant Wood, but this presentation gave me the opportunity to find out what Grant Wood was saying, what his voice was. I mean, there are tons of people who can interpret Grant Wood for you, but it is interesting to see what Grant Wood is thinking, what he's actually voicing. And you can see he's extraordinarily articulate. We just have not pulled together fully a compendium of all of these Grant Wood quotes. I think that were someone to do that, I think that would give us great insights into Grant Wood and his thoughts about various things. So I think that might be my last slide. Let's see. Oh, sorry. There is a quote. There are a couple quotes about Grant Wood after he passes away. Not surprisingly, his death surprised many people. And so there were a couple of things. This is from the opinion page of the New York Times shortly after he passed away, less than a week. In this deeper sense, what Grant Wood represented in vision rooted in the soil itself, an authentic regionalism that seeks profound and unusually hidden sources, which must be searched if the veritable spirit of place is to be grasped and made articulate in terms of art. This was reprinted in the Cedar Rapids Gazette. So, but he did end up on the opinion page in the New York Times right after his passing. And they saw even then that he was all about authenticity. Or here at Lieutenant Governor Hickenlooper from Iowa, when the Art Institute of Chicago did their memorial exhibition of Grant Wood in the fall of '42, he went and gave a speech at the exhibition opening, and he said, he and his work are truly a part of the imperishable record of freedom and self-reliance. I venture to say that the contributions of Grant Wood to a truly American field of expression will live so long as the rugged virtues of a vigorous free America shall endure. So they really saw, even shortly after his passing, how the work that he created could be very, very helpful to getting through these times of crisis with the Second World War. And that's it. So that is the last quote. Those last two quotes were not by Grant Wood, but they were certainly about him sort of right after he passed. It was interesting to see what people said about him right after he passed, because we know what people have said about him, 50, 60 years later, when the whole world has changed since then. But, in the moment, in the same year that Grant Wood had passed away, it's interesting to see how those around him, who may not have known him super well, thought of him and his contribution to American art. So the presentation mostly about Grant Wood's views of American art and his views of the importance of authenticity and rural and regionalism and all of that. But also you see that he's really differentiating American art from European art. He sees what he's doing is kind of the American modernism in his definition of it, and I think just taking a moment and listening to the man himself gives us further insights into what he was thinking and what he had then espoused publicly, which he no doubt knew was going to be quoted and printed. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions anyone might have that I'll try to answer for you.
Thank you so much, Sean. It's Kate Conrad. This is fascinating because I think what you exposed for me today was something that I've always known about Grant Wood, is that his desire was to make you see the world differently than you do. And I've had so many opportunities to bring friends and family when they're visiting Cedar Rapids to take them to the museum. And I've now had 3 people as they're leaving, and they were all driving, which was great. They would stop the car and text me and say, I am now seeing Iowa through Grant Wood's eyes. And this has changed my whole outlook on how I see the landscape. And so when I think about these other pieces that we talked about today, like, it never occurred to me, I don't know why I didn't put this together, but like in each of those Spring in the Country, Spring in Town, there's the nuclear family there. This is what could be lost in a war. Your sense of the importance of this, I mean, it is idealized. and that I think helps me understand, well, why did he idealize this? Because this is what's so precious that you want to hang on to it. So it gives you this sense of, um, a world that you can't object to in any way, there's just this wonderful paradise. And so, like I said, this was just, it helps me pull some things together that I hadn't really, been able to get to before.
Oh, I agree. I think you've hit on something there too. Whenever I talk about young corn in the galleries, I remind people it was during the Depression, and you don't see one iota of that. You don't see economic hardship at all in that piece. And so he's like, okay, through hard work, we're going to get through this. And I think with Spring in Town and Spring in the Country, at the beginning of the Second World War, he's doing much the same thing. This is what we're going to lose if we don't, get busy here. But if we come together, we're gonna, this is what we're fighting for, basically. And interestingly, uh, you know, American Gothic was not, well received certainly not by Iowans, well received when it was first painted. But because it kind of, Iowans oftentimes felt that it poked fun at them. And East Coasters thought, well, this is what Iowans look like and are like. So it kind of ticked all their boxes. But during the Second World War, American Gothic became somewhat iconic because that's what we were fighting for. We were fighting to protect our parents and grandparents, and so it became kind of an inspirational work, I think, for America, even though it was never painted for that. But I think that Grant Wood, at the core, at the base of everything that he did, was really extolling, those values that were important to him. And so, on the one level, he wasn't painting American Gothic for the war, but he was saying, this is where we come from, and these are real people, and this is part of our life. And it did take on. He didn't see it because he passed away, but it did take on a new life, a new interpretation in the Second World War. In fact, I don't believe, when I've done research on this, I don't believe the first parody of American Gothic happened until after the Second World War. Because I do think, just like Uncle Sam, that image, that poster image of, Uncle Sam, was an emblem of the Second World War. American Gothic, artistically, was not quite as popular, but kind of, he said, this is we're fighting to preserve that way of life. And so I think you're right. I think that he's all through his career, he's not just painting what he knows, he's painting what he values.
And telling you what you should value too.
Yes, and get off the stick and yeah, and you should celebrate these things. You should not take them for granted.
Yeah. Oh gosh, thank you so much. This was
Oh, you're
just
welcome.
delightful. I'm so glad I joined today.
Oh, good. Well, if you have spare time, there's lots more quotes out there. If you want to pull them together, I'd be most appreciative. But I
It's
found
a
it
retirement
fascinating.
project, right?
Yeah, it's a retirement project. Yeah, I found it fascinating. And then the more I saw and found, the more I felt this needs to be done. Because I don't mind looking stuff up like that, but it's like, wouldn't it be interesting for everyone who's interested in Grant Wood to find all of these quotes in one place? And you could kind of read through them, and if you're thinking about a particular painting, find a quote that sort of really resonates with that painting. I think that could be really, really interesting. And with older artists from earlier in time, we don't have their voice at all. We do have Grant Wood's voice, and he was quoted frequently, and so often we bypass that because we think we can draw our own conclusions from the paintings that are out there, and we can draw some things, but it is interesting to hear what he has to say, and does it jive with his paintings, and in this case, they do.
It absolutely does. So, yeah, I'm, like I said, this was just really, really eye-opening and, really satisfying too. So thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Well, I thank you for joining me. I do encourage you to look at Grant Wood, George Washington, and the American Revolution if you want a look at Grant Wood's more sort of patriotic images from American history. Again, things that we're fighting for, things that we value in our own history. Again, that level of authenticity. And but I thank you for your time today. Please join us. I think in September when we'll do our next Grant Wood in Focus. We don't have a subject yet, but we'll put it out there as soon as we do, and I look forward to seeing you then.